My name is Landry Ramsey, and the night my phone rang at 2 in the morning, I already knew it wouldn't be good news. I hadn't spoken to my parents in 8 years, not on holidays, not on birthdays, not even when my grandmother passed. So when my screen lit up with my mother's name over and over again, something in my chest tightened before I even answered. "Landry!" she cried the second I picked up. "It's over! The company is finished. The IRS is taking everything. We owe $8.4 million. You're the only one who can save us." I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't comfort her. I stared at the dark ceiling of my Dallas apartment and listened to the panic pour out of her like water from a broken pipe. When she finally stopped, I said calmly, 8 years ago, you told me to learn how to make money. I did. Then I hung up. If you've ever been told you weren't worth keeping around by the same people who later begged for your help, you'll understand why I slept better than I had in years that night. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds as I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened a folder on my laptop I hadn't touched in a long time. Notes from 8 years ago. Emails, old contracts, memories I used to avoid but never deleted. Back then, I was 26 years old, freshly graduated with an MBA from Tulane University, and standing exactly where I thought I belonged. My parents, Calvin and Beverly Ramsey, had built Ramsey Port Services from nothing in the early 1990s. Container shipping, warehousing, logistics along the Mississippi River in New Orleans. By the time I joined full-time, the company was bringing in around $40 million a year and employed over 100 people. I grew up in that business. Summers spent at the docks, afternoons learning how to read shipping schedules and supplier contracts. Everyone knew me, not as the boss's daughter, but as the one who actually understood how the operation worked. Forklift operators trusted me. Office staff came to me when systems broke. Vendors negotiated with me directly. It wasn't arrogance. It was familiarity. I earned it. Everyone assumed I would eventually take over. Everyone except my parents. One afternoon, they called a family meeting in the boardroom on the 7th floor overlooking the Mississippi. The view was beautiful. The mood was not. Papers were spread neatly across the table like evidence. My parents sat at the head. My younger brother Sullivan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking like he already knew the ending. They told me they were retiring early. They wanted to travel. Gulf Coast, Europe, cruises. They said it was time for fresh energy. Then they told me they were handing 100% of the company to Sullivan. My brother was 22, halfway through an undergraduate business degree, never worked a full quarter in operations, never handled payroll, never negotiated a port contract in his life. To keep banks and clients calm, my parents would keep their titles on paper for 2 years, but operational control would transfer immediately. Before I could process it, my phone buzzed. IT had revoked my access. Company email locked, salary suspended, health insurance canceled, corporate credit card frozen. Even my parking pass stopped working. They handed me a memo stating I had 72 hours to vacate my office. At the staff meeting the next day, Sullivan stood in front of 120 employees and laid out his vision. Halfway through, he paused, looked straight at me, and said with a lazy grin, "Looks like my sister's finally going to learn how to make money the hard way." A few people laughed. Most stared at the floor. I packed my office in silence, while conversations died when I walked past. By sunset, I wheeled one suitcase out of the building and into the humid New Orleans night. That was the last time I lived under their roof. The bus ride out of Louisiana felt unreal. I bought the cheapest ticket I could afford, to Houston, hoping a distant cousin would let me sleep on her couch for a few days. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I made myself a promise instead. I would rebuild without their name, without their money, without their permission. The first year nearly broke me. I rented a tiny studio apartment in Midtown Houston for $450 a month. Shared bathroom, thin walls, no privacy. I worked 3 jobs. Mornings as a junior analyst at a small freight brokerage, afternoons driving food deliveries, nights grading online finance courses for extra cash. Sleep came in 4-hour blocks, most days less. Every spare dollar went into certifications, CFA Level 1, tax law courses, financial modeling. I passed on my first attempts because failure wasn't an option anymore. By the second year, I noticed something others ignored. Distressed asset reports, IRS tax liens, banks desperate to offload bad debt, companies collapsing not because they were worthless, but because they were mismanaged. I realized something terrifying and empowering at the same time. Disasters weren't random. They were predictable. And if you understood the system, you could position yourself on the right side of someone else's collapse. That realization changed everything. By the time I moved to Dallas and reconnected with an old classmate who believed in my vision, I wasn't chasing survival anymore. I was building leverage. 8 years after being told I was useless, the people who said it would need me more than they ever imagined. And that's when the real story began. Dallas didn't feel like home at first. It felt temporary, like everything else in my life back then. I moved into a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Uptown. Nothing fancy, beige carpet, cheap cabinets, a view of a parking lot instead of a skyline. But for the first time since New Orleans, the lease was in my name only. No favors, no family ties. I kept my expenses painfully low on purpose. Same used Honda, same coffee shop on the corner every morning. Same rotation of 2 work outfits during the week. On the outside, nothing about my life looked impressive. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I'd learned early that when people underestimate you, they stop watching closely. During the day, I worked as a senior analyst at a regional freight brokerage. The job paid enough to live, but more importantly, it gave me access. Access to distressed balance sheets, access to loan documents, access to quiet conversations bankers had when they thought no one important was listening. At night, I studied. Not motivational books, not hustle culture nonsense. I studied failure. I read IRS manuals the way some people read novels. I learned how payroll taxes actually work, how penalties compound, how liens attach to property, and which creditors get paid first when everything falls apart. I learned which mistakes companies always make right before they collapse. Late payments disguised as timing issues, personal guarantees signed too casually, lifestyle inflation masked as executive compensation, and the most dangerous one of all, owners who stop listening to people who understand the numbers. Some nights, exhaustion hit so hard I cried at my kitchen table. Not because I wanted to quit, but because I didn't have the luxury of quitting. No one was coming to rescue me. No inheritance, no safety net, no apology waiting on the other side. I had to be smarter than the system that pushed me out. That winter, I ran into an old friend from business school at a CFA study group. His name was Nathan Holt. We hadn't spoken in years, but he still remembered how I used to dismantle case studies in class while everyone else focused on surface-level answers. Over cheap coffee in a strip mall Starbucks, I laid out my idea. A small, quiet fund. No marketing, no headlines. Focused exclusively on distressed debt, IRS tax liens, and bank foreclosures. Buy what others were afraid of touching. Control the outcome instead of reacting to it. Nathan listened without interrupting. Then he said, "If you're serious, I'll get licensed." 6 months later, we launched Whitaker Capital with $50,000 scraped together from savings and a couple of silent investors Nathan trusted. My name didn't appear anywhere. We used a retired accountant as the public face. Clean record, calm demeanor. Willing to sign documents for a modest fee. I stayed invisible by design. I wired money, built models, negotiated directly with IRS collection officers through encrypted emails, never signed a page that could trace back to my family. The first deal nearly made me sick with adrenaline. A failing trucking company in San Antonio, $2.1 million in unpaid payroll taxes, assets tied up, management paralyzed, banks desperate. We bought the lien for just over $1 million in cash. Within 90 days, we controlled the equipment, the yard, and the outcome. The returns weren't flashy. They were brutal, efficient, legal, and repeatable. Word spread quietly in the right circles. Banks started calling before auctions opened. Term sheets arrived unsolicited. Every deal reinforced the same truth. I wasn't lucky. I was prepared. 3 years passed without a single call home. I didn't send cards. I didn't respond to group messages. When my grandmother died, I found out through a cousin's Facebook post and closed the app without commenting. Silence became my shield. Meanwhile, public records back in Louisiana told a story no one wanted to hear. At first, everything looked fine. Revenue stable, employees smiling in photos. My brother hosting crawfish boils and posing with local politicians. Then the cracks appeared. Missed property taxes, supplier lawsuits, mechanics liens. The first federal tax lien filed quietly in Orleans Parish. I tracked it all the way I tracked any other distressed asset. No anger, no satisfaction, just data. By year 6, the numbers stopped lying. Debt ballooned, assets leveraged, cash flow bleeding. Payroll taxes unpaid quarter after quarter. And still, every holiday, the same FaceTime call. My mother smiling too hard, my father pouring bourbon. Sullivan flashing a new watch from a yacht or casino suite. "Still playing with spreadsheets?" he'd ask. I kept my camera off and hung up early. They never once asked what I actually did. Then one night, the filings spiked. $8.4 million in unpaid federal taxes. That was the number my mother cried into the phone at 2 a.m. That was the number that told me we'd reached the point of no return. I closed my laptop, stared at the wall, and felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't running anymore. I was standing exactly where I needed to be. And now, I had a choice to make. The first call came from my brother. I recognized the Louisiana area code instantly. 8 years without a single missed call, and suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Landry?" Sullivan said. and the confidence I remembered was gone. His voice cracked halfway through my name. I messed up. The IRS is taking everything. They're pulling trucks from the port right now. I'm about to lose the house. You're the only one who understands numbers like this. You have to help me. I let him talk until there was nothing left but shallow breathing on the other end of the line. Then I said, "No." He exploded. Family, blood, legacy, everything we built together. The same words people always reach for when consequences arrive. I waited until he stopped yelling. "No," I said again, and ended the call. My mother tried next. She was hysterical. She said Sullivan was having panic attacks, that my father hadn't slept in days, that they'd sign anything, give me any percentage, hand everything back if I would just wire the money to stop the seizures. "I'm not coming," I said. My father called the next morning. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been yelling at lawyers all night. "We made a mistake," he said. "Please." Mistakes have consequences. I hung up. For 6 weeks, I didn't answer a single call. Voicemails piled up. Offers escalated. Half the company, 75%. Everything. Promises layered on top of panic. I listened to none of it. Instead, I watched public records update in real time. Acceleration clauses triggered. Repo trucks arrived. Assets seized. Lawsuits stacked. The port slowed to a crawl. Late one night, an email landed in my inbox from a senior vice president at one of the banks. They were desperate. They asked me to attend a workout meeting as a neutral advisor. They sent a limited power of attorney. They wanted someone who understood the numbers without emotional attachment. I printed the document, signed it, and booked a drive to New Orleans. 800 kilometers in one shot. I arrived just before midnight. The house in the Garden District still stood, but the circular driveway was empty. No luxury cars, no company trucks, only my mother's aging Lexus and my father's old pickup. She opened the door before I knocked. She looked 20 years older. She reached for me, but I stepped past her and into the house. My father came down the stairs slowly, gripping the banister like it might disappear. Sullivan sat on the couch in sweatpants, staring at his phone, as if another miracle might appear. "I knew you'd come," he said, forcing a smile. "I've got a plan. If you wire $5 million today, we can stop the levy. I'll sign whatever you want." I set my bag down and looked around. The chandelier was still there. Half the furniture was gone. Family photos stopped at Sullivan's graduation. There wasn't a single picture of me after age 20. "I'm not wiring a cent," I said. "You can't do this," he snapped. "We're family." "You made it clear 8 years ago that I wasn't," I said. My mother cried. My father finally admitted they were wrong. "I don't need anything from you," I told them. "I came because the bank asked me to witness what happens when a company collapses." I left before dawn. 2 weeks later, we met at the port. Auction notices were taped to gates. The air smelled like diesel and endings. My attorney and our fund's representative arrived with quiet confidence. They laid the documents on the table. Whitaker Capital had acquired the entire IRS tax lien. We were now the primary secured creditor. The room froze. Sullivan jumped to his feet, shouting, accusing, threatening. I waited until he ran out of air. Then I looked straight at him and said the only sentence I'd come to deliver. 8 years ago, you told me to learn how to make money. I did. No one spoke after that. I walked out without looking back. The decision was final. The auction lasted 3 days. 3 long days under the Louisiana sun, where everything my parents once built was reduced to line items and lot numbers. Cranes, warehouses, container yards, tractors, office furniture. One by one, they went under the gavel. Whitaker Capital bought only what made sense. No emotion, no discounts for history. Market price, clean transfers. The rest scattered to regional operators who had waited years for a chance to step into that footprint. By the end of the month, Ramsey Port Services no longer existed on any sign, filing, or directory. Sullivan filed personal Chapter 7 bankruptcy the morning after the final hammer fell. Most of his remaining personal guarantees were discharged, but there was nothing left to save. The yacht was gone. The penthouse was gone. The watches were auctioned. Last I heard, he was working night shifts loading trucks at a third-party warehouse for $19 an hour. My parents kept the house. They were spared only because they hadn't co-signed Sullivan's later loans. They sold antiques, jewelry, and a second car to stay afloat. The long dining table that once hosted 20 people at Thanksgiving now seated 4. Most nights the house stayed quiet. I blocked every phone number connected to them the same week the auction closed. No forwarding address, no explanations, no exceptions. That chapter was finished. Whitaker Capital closed the year managing over $1 billion in assets. We moved into larger offices, hired new analysts, started expanding east. On the outside, my life didn't change much. Same apartment, same car, same coffee shop on the corner. The difference was internal. No one could erase me anymore. No one could revoke my access. No one could tell me my value depended on their approval. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt finished. Here's what I learned, and what I want every woman listening to hear. When people push you out the door, don't stand on the porch waiting for them to change their minds. Walk through it. Keep walking. Build something that doesn't require their permission. Because when they finally come looking for a seat at your table, you're allowed to decide whether they get one. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is say no. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If any part of this felt familiar, leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more stories about women reclaiming their power, you know where to find me.